It was a bright Saturday morning when the phone call came. I was still in bed, barely awake, the sun just starting to peek through the blinds. The sudden ring of my phone startled me, and I glanced at the screen. It was my neighbor, Carla, better known in the neighborhood as HOA Karen. "Hey, it's Carla. Just wanted to let you know, your car's been towed," she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. I sat up in bed, heart racing. "What?" I replied, barely comprehending what she had just said. "Why? What are you talking about? Your car's parked in front of my driveway. The HOA doesn't allow that. I called a tow truck. It's already gone," she said, as if she had been waiting for this moment all week. I could barely keep my cool. "That's ridiculous," I muttered under my breath. "I parked there last night. You know I don't block your driveway. It's always been fine." Carla, however, had a reputation. She was the self-appointed enforcer of the neighborhood's HOA rules, the one who loved pointing out every minor infraction. And she'd been gunning for me for months. Her voice was smug as she continued, "Well, the rules are the rules, and I take them seriously. Maybe next time, you'll remember that." I felt a surge of frustration rise within me. The HOA was supposed to be there for our benefit, to maintain the neighborhood's appearance, not as a weapon for petty power struggles. I didn't know what irked me more, the fact that she'd called the tow truck or that she was so smug about it. "Fine," I said, hanging up abruptly. My hands were shaking as I stared at the phone in disbelief. It wasn't the first time she'd done something like this. In fact, it was getting old. I needed a plan. I wasn't going to let this go without some sort of payback. The day dragged on as I fumed about the situation. My car had been towed to some impound lot miles away, costing me a small fortune just to get it back. But that wasn't the worst part. No, the worst part was Carla's smug face when she passed me later that afternoon, acting like the whole thing was a small victory for her. She was walking her dog, that ridiculous little poodle of hers that always yapped at the fence whenever I tried to take out the trash. As she passed by, she glanced at me with that same condescending look. "Just doing my part for the neighborhood," she said with a smirk. "Hope you found your car all right." I barely kept my cool, forcing a smile through clenched teeth. "Thanks for nothing, Carla." She didn't even flinch. The nerve of her. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything in my mind. How she had towed my car for no good reason, how she had humiliated me, and how she looked at me with that self-righteousness. And then it hit me. Revenge. A little payback wouldn't hurt. But it had to be perfect. Something that would make her regret ever crossing me. The next day, I took a walk around the neighborhood, surveying my options. I had to figure out a way to hit her where it hurt, to disrupt her precious little world. And then it came to me, the ultimate revenge. It was a Thursday evening when I made my move. I had spent the entire afternoon preparing, making sure everything was in place. I knew Carla was home because I had seen her car parked in the driveway earlier. That's when I saw it, the perfect tool for my plan, the military surplus truck. I'd been talking to a friend of mine, Pete, who worked for a local company that sold surplus equipment. He had recently gotten his hands on a massive 30-ton tank, and he'd been telling me all about it. "Just imagine," Pete had said, with a mischievous grin. "One of these things could block an entire street. I'd be happy to bring it over to you, just for fun." At first, I thought it was crazy. But then, as the events of the past few days kept swirling in my head, I realized just how perfect it would be. The sight of a 30-ton tank blocking Carla's driveway would be the kind of spectacle that would leave her speechless. At precisely 10 p.m., I received a text from Pete. "Ready when you are." I gave him the green light. Within minutes, the rumble of the tank's engine could be heard in the distance. It was massive, casting a shadow over the quiet street as it slowly rolled up the block. I watched from my window as Pete maneuvered the tank into place, right in front of Carla's house. He parked it at an angle, completely blocking the street. No one could get in or out. It was perfect. I smiled to myself, feeling a sense of satisfaction as I watched her house from across the street. The next morning, I got a text from Carla before I even had a chance to make coffee. "You've got to be kidding me," she wrote. "What the hell is going on? I can't even get out of my driveway." I smiled, the tension from the past few days finally starting to fade. I had no intention of telling her it was me. I simply responded, "Maybe you should check the HOA rules about blocking the street." That would keep her guessing. As I watched her panic from across the street, a wave of satisfaction washed over me. I wasn't a vindictive person, but sometimes you had to take matters into your own hands. Carla had pushed me too far. But there was more to come. This was only the beginning. And so, as the tank sat in front of Carla's house, blocking the entire street, I couldn't help but wonder how she was going to react next. What would her next move be? Would she call the police? Would the HOA get involved? Or would she finally learn that there were consequences to messing with the wrong neighbor? Only time would tell. The hours passed slowly, the tank still blocking the street, and I watched Carla's attempts to get out of her driveway with a growing sense of satisfaction. Her frustration was palpable, and I couldn't help but chuckle at how helpless she looked. I saw her peeking through the blinds, making frantic calls on her phone, probably to the HOA, or maybe even the police. At one point, I heard her yell out her window, demanding to know who was responsible. But no one answered. The street was as quiet as it had ever been, except for the occasional rumble of the tank's engine when Pete shifted it slightly. By noon, Carla had become a mess of angry phone calls and frantic pacing in front of her house. She had managed to get a few neighbors to stop by and try to help, but no one seemed to know what to do. There was no way to move that tank without a crew, and even then, it would take time. The entire block was on edge. People were peering out of their windows, drawn to the commotion. Some of them had been following the saga with Carla for months. They knew about her habit of calling the HOA over the most trivial infractions, the way she always seemed to enjoy wielding her so-called authority over everyone in the neighborhood. I could see them whispering to each other, sharing a quiet sense of solidarity. Carla had finally met her match. But it wasn't just about the tank. That was only the beginning. Carla's next move came in the form of an email, sent out to everyone on the street. The subject line was all caps: urgent, HOA action required, immediate intervention needed. I opened the email with a mix of curiosity and amusement. Dear neighbors, it began. It is with great urgency that I address the situation that is currently obstructing our peaceful community. A military-grade tank has been deliberately positioned in front of my property, blocking access to my driveway, and making it impossible for anyone to get in or out of the street. This is a clear violation of both HOA and local city codes. The individual responsible for this egregious act needs to be identified and held accountable. I could practically hear her voice as I read. I will be contacting the proper authorities to remove this menace and will not rest until the person responsible is identified and dealt with. I trust that you will all support me in taking action to restore order to our neighborhood. Carla, always the martyr. She was trying to rally the neighbors, turning the whole situation into a crusade for her personal justice. But I wasn't done yet. I had anticipated this. Of course, she would try to use her HOA connections to fight back. She wasn't going to take this lying down, and I knew that the moment I pulled this stunt, the HOA would get involved. It was just a matter of time before she escalated. But this was where my plan came into play. I wasn't about to let her have the last word, not after all the trouble she'd caused me. So I made a few calls of my own. I reached out to a couple of friends I had at the HOA. People who were more than willing to turn a blind eye to a few creative interpretations of the rules. Carla thought she was the only one who could wield power over the neighborhood, but I knew I had the right connections to push back. By the time evening rolled around, the HOA had responded to Carla's email with an official statement that added fuel to the fire. Dear residents, it read, we are aware of the situation regarding the obstruction caused by a military tank on street name. We have consulted with local law enforcement and are working on a resolution. We are also taking this opportunity to remind everyone that such unauthorized vehicles are strictly prohibited in our neighborhood. Please refrain from any further actions that may escalate the matter. Let us work together to resolve this peacefully. That was it. The HOA had just made everything official. Carla had escalated it to the point where it was no longer just a personal vendetta. It was now a community issue. But what Carla didn't realize was that I had already anticipated her move. While she was busy rallying the HOA, I was taking my own steps to ensure this wouldn't end so easily. By the time the HOA statement hit, Pete had already moved the tank into a more strategic position, just out of sight from the main street, but still within full view of Carla's house. It was a subtle change, but the message was clear: the tank wasn't going anywhere. Not until I was ready. The following day, I woke up to the sound of a commotion outside. When I peeked through my window, I saw Carla standing at the end of the street, gesturing frantically to a tow truck that had arrived, presumably sent by the HOA. I watched as Carla practically chased the tow truck driver, trying to convince him that the tank needed to be removed immediately. The driver, a burly guy with a thick beard, looked completely confused as he glanced back at the tank. "No offense, lady, but I don't know how to tow a tank," he said, shrugging. "You need a crane or something for that." Carla was livid. I could hear her shouting at him, but it was clear he wasn't interested in playing along. She quickly pulled out her phone, no doubt to make a few more calls to escalate the situation. But while she was distracted, I slipped out the back door. I needed to make sure that the HOA stayed in line, that they didn't take matters into their own hands and try to sweep my revenge under the rug. I walked down the block to the HOA office, a small building just off the main street. I knew the manager there, someone who had always had a soft spot for me, and I needed to make sure that they would keep their distance. Inside, I found Carla standing by the counter, fuming. She hadn't seen me yet. I could hear her arguing with the office manager about the tank situation, demanding that they do something about it. "Are you seriously going to let this happen?" she was saying. "The HOA needs to do something. This is a blatant violation of our rules, and if you don't do anything, I'll escalate this to the city council. I'll make sure this whole neighborhood knows how incompetent this board is." The manager, a middle-aged woman named Janet, was trying to stay calm. "We're looking into it, Carla. But it's a complicated situation. You know these kinds of things take time." Carla wasn't having it. She slammed her hand on the counter. "No, it doesn't take time. This is a matter of principle. The rules are the rules. I've lived here for years, and I've never seen anything like this. I won't let it stand." I stepped forward just as Carla was about to launch into another tirade. "Is everything okay here?" I asked, keeping my voice light, friendly, even though my mind was racing. Carla froze. She hadn't expected me to show up. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, narrowing her eyes at me. "I was just checking in," I said, smiling. "I wanted to make sure the HOA was going to handle things fairly, without overstepping their bounds. After all, we can't have things getting out of hand, right?" Carla didn't reply, but I could see the wheels turning in her head. She wasn't done yet, but neither was I. We were in a standoff now, and neither of us was going to back down. I turned to Janet. "Is everything on track? I just want to make sure everything's fair." Janet looked uncomfortable, but nodded. "We're doing what we can, but it's a tricky situation." Carla shot me a look, her face flushed with anger. "You're behind this, aren't you?" she snapped. I didn't respond. Instead, I just smiled. As I left the HOA office, the tension in the air was palpable. The next move was anyone's guess, but one thing was clear: this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The tension was thick in the air as I left the HOA office. I could still feel Carla's eyes on my back, the weight of her gaze as if she were ready to explode. But I didn't let it show. I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of seeing how much her petty attacks had riled me up. The days that followed were a strange mix of anticipation and quiet triumph. As expected, Carla wasn't done. Far from it. But neither was I. I kept my eyes on the neighborhood. I knew she would escalate. She always did. And true to form, by the end of the week, I received another email from her. This one wasn't just a complaint, it was an ultimatum. "Dear neighbors," it began, "I am writing to inform you that I will be calling an emergency HOA meeting to address the situation regarding the military tank obstructing our street. This is no longer a matter of neighborhood safety. It is a matter of principle. If the HOA refuses to take immediate action, I will be forced to take legal steps to protect the integrity of our community. We cannot allow one person's reckless behavior to destroy the peace we all deserve." I couldn't help but laugh when I read it. Reckless behavior? It was rich, coming from someone who had called a tow truck on my car over a minor parking issue. But I wasn't laughing for long. There was something in her tone now, something more dangerous. Carla was no longer just an annoyance. She was becoming a force to be reckoned with. The HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Wednesday, and I knew that would be the moment everything came to a head. I wasn't going to let her have the last word, but I wasn't sure how this would end. I decided to show up, not just as a resident, but as someone who had every right to be heard. I was done being the victim. The HOA office was packed when I arrived, the room buzzing with anticipation. Carla was there, of course, sitting at the front, already whispering to anyone who would listen. She had that look in her eyes, the one she always wore when she was about to go on the attack. The board members were gathered around the table, all trying to look official, as if the presence of an actual military tank on the street wasn't something they'd need to make a decision about. I sat in the back, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold. The room fell silent as the meeting began, and Carla wasted no time getting to the point. "I am here today to demand action," she said, her voice cutting through the room like a knife. "This tank has been blocking our street for days, and despite my numerous complaints, the HOA has done nothing. We are living in chaos, and I will not stand by while one person makes a mockery of the community." I could see the other residents nodding, some looking uncomfortable, others seemingly ready to jump on her bandwagon. But there were also a few skeptical glances thrown in my direction. I knew I had to be careful, but I also knew that this was my moment to set the record straight. When Carla finished, the board members hesitated, clearly unsure of how to proceed. The president, a thin man in his late 50s named Mr. Brooks, cleared his throat. "Thank you, Carla," he said. "We understand your concerns. But as you know, the HOA rules don't specifically cover situations like this. We've contacted local law enforcement, and they've informed us that the tank is technically not illegal." Carla was having none of it. "This is ridiculous. I'm talking about the safety of this neighborhood. What kind of community are we if we let one person do whatever they want? If this isn't dealt with, I'm calling the city council. I'll take legal action if I have to." Her words hung in the air, but I could feel the tide shifting. People were starting to see her for what she was, a person willing to tear the entire neighborhood apart for the sake of her own ego. Mr. Brooks turned to me, his gaze lingering for a moment too long. "And what about you? Your name? What do you have to say for yourself?" I stood up slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't nervous. I was angry. "I'm not here to argue about rules," I said, my voice steady. "I'm here because I've had enough of being pushed around. Carla, you've made this whole neighborhood a battleground with your constant complaints. You've used the HOA to control people's lives over the smallest issues. You had my car towed for parking in front of your driveway, for crying out loud." A few people nodded in agreement, and I could see Carla's face redden. "But this," I gestured toward the table where the HOA members were sitting, "this is about something bigger. This is about how one person's need for control can destroy the peace of an entire community. You've pushed me to the point where I had to fight back, and I don't regret it." There was a long pause. Carla opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off. "I'm not asking for an apology," I continued. "I'm just asking for fairness. If we're going to live in a community, we need to respect each other. That means following the rules, yes, but it also means having a little compassion. And when someone like Carla uses the HOA as a weapon, it hurts all of us." I sat down, and the room was silent. For the first time, I saw doubt in Carla's eyes. Her usual confidence had cracked. She wasn't the only one with power here anymore. Mr. Brooks cleared his throat. "All right, we'll take everything into consideration," he said, though his tone suggested he was ready to wrap things up. But just as the meeting was about to adjourn, there was a loud knock on the door. The room fell silent as the door swung open. A police officer stepped in, holding a clipboard. "I've been informed that there's a situation with an unauthorized vehicle blocking a street," the officer asked. Carla shot to her feet, her eyes wide. Yes, it's that tank. It's illegal, and..." The officer held up his hand. "Actually, I'm here to report that the tank is not illegal, but we have received a complaint about the disruption it's causing." Carla's face drained of color. "What do you mean?" The officer paused, glancing at the board members. "We've also had a few neighbors file complaints, not just about the tank, but about ongoing harassment related to HOA rules." There it was, the final blow. The officer had just revealed that Carla's obsessive policing had pushed the limits of what the community would tolerate. As the meeting dragged on, it was clear the HOA wasn't going to side with her this time. Her grip on the neighborhood had loosened, and her threats no longer held the same power. The following week, I woke up to the sound of a tow truck again, but this time, the tank was finally being removed, not because of the HOA or Carla's complaints, but because Pete had arranged for it to be safely stored. Carla's threats had run their course. By the time I stepped outside, the street was back to normal. The tank was gone, and so was Carla's reign of terror. The neighborhood was quieter now, more peaceful, and for once, it felt like justice had been served. Carla never tried to call the HOA on me again. Her petty power trips came to an abrupt end, and for the first time, I felt like I could breathe easy. Sometimes, you just have to stand your ground and show people that no matter how small they think you are, you're capable of making a big impact.